Thank you so much for coming and for some of you coming back from last week. My name is Lucas Cuellar and I work at Disability Rights Maine as an advocate currently, and I will pass it over to you, Jane, for your introduction.
Sure. My name is Jane Moore, and I work at Disability Rights Maine as an advocate as well. I've been there about 8.5 years. I formerly worked with one of our sister agencies in Chicago, Equipped for Equality, as an attorney, but in this capacity, I am an advocate here.
Thank you. And we're here today for this sort of second installment of our employment webinars for Disability Employment Month. And this is for making vocational rehab work. So we will really be focusing on vocational rehab and some other potential options that can assist with getting to work. For some of you, this will be a review of information we had last time. But we like to start with this. It's always important to say this every session. The information we're presenting today is for education purposes only. It is legal information, but it is not legal advice. If you are in a position where you need legal advice, please feel free to reach out to us individually and do an intake. And we will see what kind of capacity we could help, or we'll connect you with somebody who could. Everything we're talking about today is up to date as of today, but laws and rules and regulations do change pretty frequently, really. So it's good to make sure that anything that you're relying on that we've talked about today is still correct if you're going back to this information in the future.
So our mission is Disability Rights Maine advances justice and equality by enforcing rights and expanding opportunities for people with disabilities in Maine. Pretty straightforward. This is what we hope to be doing. So I think that not everybody understands where Disability Rights Maine comes from. Like, who are we? About how do we exist? And we're actually part of a national network of protection and advocacy agencies. And just briefly, this came about as a result of an expose that Geraldo Rivero did in the early 70s about a hospital, Willowbrook. And Willowbrook is in it's upstate New York. And he went as invited by a doctor, and he went in to check the conditions there, and they were horrendous. There's a video on YouTube. It can be pretty disturbing to watch, but the conditions, the treatment of people with disabilities in that facility was horrendous. And that led eventually to some federal legislation that created the protection and advocacy organizations. The first one, the first project, the first legislation had to do with people with developmental disabilities, but then it's moved on to include many other projects, federal funding sources. The National Protection and Advocacy organizations, there's 57 of them in the exist. There's one in every state. There's one in Washington, D.C. There's one in every territory, Puerto Rico, Guam, and there's also one in for the Four Corners region, a dedicated tribal disability rights or protection and advocacy organization. So we are Disability Rights Maine was specifically founded in 1977, and we did start with the project for developmental disabilities, but soon the federal government provided funding for individuals who have psychiatric labels, and then from then on, we became very active in all sorts of other grants, and I think we're going to get a little chance to hear about those. So.
Yep. And just to add to that a little bit, the
Oh,
important
yeah.
thing to know about DRM is that we are statewide, and we do our best to get anywhere our clients are.
Right. And we also provide cross disability. So the only criteria is that you have a disability. It's a self-disclosed criteria. That's the eligibility that we have. And we do have some priorities, which Lucas is going to discuss, but it's important to know that we don't have very stringent eligibility requirements. One last thing is we are a nonprofit, and we have a board that's made up of 51% of people with disabilities. So.
And I apologize for any slide jumping that happens over here. Um, so thank you, Jane. To kick off our priority areas, really the reason that we have these is so we can make sure that we are, using the resources we have to focus on some what we've been informed are the most maybe worrying areas, or um, but when we get feedback from our stakeholders that these are the things that they're concerned about and we are also concerned about. So these are this is the list of agency priorities as of now. Um, our board, which as Jane said is 51% people with disabilities themselves, helps us set these. And so do sort of our national organization, which is kind of helping all of the protection and advocacy agencies countrywide um, figure out our strategies and our work. Uh, we have we've focused on these particularly because um, our sort of mission, right, is to eliminate abuse, neglect, and exploitation, especially as they happen in facilities. We're also doing everything we can to increase independence, and reducing the use of guardianship is one of those tactics. We do focus on improving access to disability-related supports and services, including access to legal remedies or the courts. And that's kind of what we'll be talking about today, access to services. We also are focusing on increasing access to competitive and integrated employment. We do work if there are issues with housing discrimination, and we have a team that focuses kind of exclusively on access to inclusive education. And right now is a good time to also mention, as we lead up to the November elections, that we do a lot of work to make sure that voting is accessible to all people with disabilities in the state. Pass us on to the next. The way that we do this work and how you all can get access to our services. Well, I'm sorry. The way that we do this work is really what our services are. So we sometimes get calls, and really the only thing that somebody needs is information or a connection to an organization or an individual who may be able to better help with that particular problem. So that's information and referral. We also do individual cases, and that would be individual advocacy sometimes, and sometimes individual legal representation if that's required for a particular situation. We do trainings like this one, and we do also provide assistance to people with self-advocacy. So that might look like, helping someone gather all the information they need so they can go forward with a particular issue or access a particular service. We also conduct outreach where Disability Rights Maine staff go out into the communities and to the places where our clients are living or working or spending time, so that we can make sure that those places are also meeting the needs of people with disabilities. And monitoring is almost like a little bit more, it's like outreach plus, I would say, where we go because we have some reason to need a little bit more investigation of a particular place or situation. Here are some ways that you can request our assistance. We do have an online intake that can be very helpful for people who don't, maybe are working during the day and can't call us during the sort of 8 to 4 hours when we have an actual person who will answer the phone. If you do call, you can always leave a message and we will get back to you. And you can also learn a lot more about the the way that we do our services and anything that we may just not at all be able to help with on our website, which is www.drme.org. So we're here today to talk about vocational rehab and ways to get to work. And these are some of the reasons we've heard from people about why they might want to go to work. So obviously, working means you're going to make some money so you can pay bills. It's also a way to build community and meet new people, make connections with hopefully people who at least share this some interests that you do, because you are working in the same location. Um, it's also, having access to income also allows for a lot more freedom and independence. You could relocate to it or move to a new area, and you can, of course, buy what you want. So something I like to mention is Maine is an employment first state. And what that means is that before looking at other services, support teams are supposed to help people with disabilities get working if that is what they want to do. You can, of course, do it without VR, but VR is able to assist with several different types of services and in several different ways. And we're going to talk about some of those today and also how to make sure that the services you do get from VR are matching with the need.
So, what is vocational rehab? You're going to hear it referred to sometimes as VR or voc rehab. So just we're not going to try to use a lot of acronyms here, but we might be saying VR throughout this. It is a program from the Department of Labor, and it helps people with disabilities find, maintain, advance in, or change employment. I actually found out some interesting, actually, Lucas Kuby into the history of the vocational rehabilitation program, which started after World War I when veterans were coming back with injuries and disabilities. And so the program was first just for veterans with physical disabilities. And then that was in 1918 and 1920, it expanded to anybody with a physical disability. Wasn't until after World War II that they included people with psychiatric labels, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, people that didn't fit into that physical disability part. So I think that was interesting to me. So it's been around a long time. Um, it was embedded in the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was amended several times, and most recently by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Every state has a VR program, and they share funding between the federal government and the state government. So that's a little history and a little information about what VR is.
So many of you have probably been through this process, or if you haven't, this is, might be new information. But this is really about how to apply for vocational rehab. And please excuse our typo. So you can apply to VR online on their website. And we have heard from them recently that really they would love for people to go to that website and get as much out of it as they can. There is a division of vocational rehab orientation that takes place on the third Thursday of every month. I believe it's virtual, but it's live. So you can register for that orientation on the website. If you don't have access to a computer or computers are not your thing, you can also go in person to the local career center and talk with the counselor of the day. And they should be able to assist with either, a in-paper application or making sure you can get what you need to apply. You can also print and mail an application to the nearest career center. The application is downloadable on the website, and you could have supporters help you apply for VR. Um, you, when you do apply, if you want vocational rehab to be able to talk with your supports. That could be your case manager, any other supports who are in your life. You can um, do a release of information for them or have your guardian do that. And once you apply, uh, basically they will accept the application and do an intake to determine that you're eligible. In that process, vocational rehab will gather information about your disability or about the disability of the individual and how that disability impacts work. So they might actually interview the person, or they might, reach out if they need more information. They will probably also look at records. This process is supposed to be completed within 30 days. Um, it can be extended to 60 days, and that should be if both vocational rehab and the person who's applying agree to that extension. And if they need additional medical tests or assessments done, they can require those, and those would be paid for by vocational rehab.
So eligibility, there are eligibility criteria for accessing vocational rehab services. This is a definition out of the statute, so I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk a little bit. So it's a physical or mental impairment that is a substantial impediment to employment and requires VR services to prepare for, secure, retain, or regain employment consistent with strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. So we're going to talk a lot about informed choice a little bit later. There is a presumption, however, because originally they were, can this person benefit from VR services? It was amended, the act was amended a while back about making a presumption that all applicants can benefit from VR services and work. So the presumption is that VR can do it and you can work. So I think that it's really the burden is on VR to say if someone isn't able to benefit from VR and work, and it's a very high burden for them to say that. The presumption is always in favor of the individual. So a little bit more about eligibility. SSI and SSDI, so supplemental security income and disability benefits, Social Security disability benefits are presumed eligible. And what that does sometimes is makes it go really quickly. So you walk in the door, you don't have to go through any extra stuff. You're medically already approved. They'll probably follow up with things about vocational, like some aptitude tests and things like that, but you're presumed eligible medically. Sometimes the demand is more than the resources available, and that's something we all face. So there is an order of selection, and I don't want to go into a huge amount of details. I can answer questions maybe at the end, but it basically goes down to who has the most significant disabilities, and they do it by functional. It's like diagnosis. You meet 2 out of 3, and so it's unfortunate that sometimes this has to occur, but the priorities are set so people with the most significant disabilities are the ones who will be first. And after those individuals are served, the next group comes down, and it just goes down till the end where there's just all people with disabilities. So it's a kind of a tricky thing, and I don't want to go into too much detail right now, but I'd be glad to at least talk about what's in the statute. So VR could also serve students, and they have a whole program on pre-employment transition. So students aged 14 to 21 who are eligible for VR, so they still have to meet the VR eligibility requirements. But if they're enrolled as students in secondary or post-secondary education programs, and I think, yeah, of course, in college you don't have an IEP, or an IEP or Section 504 plan in high school, then these individuals are eligible would be able to work with the pre-employment transition program. So you apply to VR, you have to show your documented disability, and a lot of that information can come from your high school, or your whatever you already submitted, and then you have to also then show there's a barrier to work and it requires VR to help find and keep a job. Some of the services, and I'm going to be really brief about that, but they can do some specific services targeted at transition youth, such as counseling. They can do a tour of colleges, they can do a tour of workplaces, if you wish, they can consult with a family. Your VR can participate in your IEP meetings at school. So it's a little bit different kind of approach to obtaining employment by VR. mostly targeted at students who are between 14 and 21. Okay.
Some of these services where we just talked about a little bit, but this is sort of a list of examples, right, of things that VR could do to help somebody get working. And a lot of the time it's because of things like this that people are encouraged to go through VR instead of not, because of those supports, it really can make um, getting back to work or getting to work that much more accessible for folks and sustainable. So this is not a list of things that VR will absolutely provide for every single person. The needs of every single person that they're serving obviously are individual and unique. So it could be they can help pay school tuition and supplies to go to school. Definitely driver's education. Sometimes they can also assist with transportation. So repairs to a vehicle or a car if you have one. Um, we have one example of a case at DRM where we were able to assist somebody to get VR to help them get a car. Not that the VR paid for a new car for anyone, but they were able to help. Um, they can also help folks start their own businesses, make modifications to houses, or um, make sure that people have medical goods and anything that they may need. Also, interpreters, note takers. VR can provide on the job training, and they do a lot of career counseling, job coaching, those kinds of things. VR can also do, these are considered sort of supplemental services. So, for example, if I were working with VR and I was starting a job in 2 weeks, but my job was in Presque Isle, Maine, and I live in Portland, VR would be able to help me relocate to Presque Isle and possibly even fund some of my, uh, moving expenses, early early months of rental payments or something like that, so that I could relocate and go to work in Presque Isle.
So all these services, examples of services, there's no definitive list. So these are based on um, this individual plan for employment, which is the IPE. And this is a formal plan that an individual who is working with VR creates with their VR counselor, and it outlines the services VR has agreed to provide. It has some components. The next slide we'll talk about that, but it really is a time for you to tell your counselor what you want to do, what kind of job, what you think you'll need to do so. It'll be a discussion you have with your counselor, but it's always guided by the individual's choice. The individual who's using the VR services, their informed choice is critical to the IPE. And then eventually it has to be agreed upon with the counselor. There might be some limits that the VR can't do certain things. I mean, I know if you go to an out-of-state school, like a college, there's components there that they have to calculate the in-state tuition versus that. So, that type of thing does happen. But I just want to emphasize that it really is based on it's based on the informed choice of the individual who is looking for work. Some of the components of VR, so next slide, um, include the employment goal. So at some point, you're going to have to say uh, what you want to do. They're going to help. VR will help you. They might help you. There's tests you can take, aptitude tests. There's a whole list of occupations, but part of the employment, i.e. IPE, is a goal towards employment. Now that can change. Part of it may be exploration of certain work and, like, say, computer work, and so that might be the goal. IPEs can be changed. They're not for you the whole time that you are with VR. So, but the employment goal is the individual's. It's not your case managers, it's not the guardians, the parent, the teachers, or any other supporters. It's the goal of the individual who's looking for work. In the employment in the IPE, there's also going to list the services and the providers. the costs of this and the timeliness of it, the time frames for that. The idea is to keep moving. There'll be some, you're going to have also in the IPE how you're going to measure progression towards employment. So it really is, what this is an agreement between you and VR of what they're going to do and what you're going to do. So it's going to lay out the individual's responsibilities and the VR responsibilities. Sometimes there may be some contributions that the individual has to do or may have to apply for certain funding sources in order to support that. But generally, VR is responsibility is to move you towards your goal. But the individual might have some other things that they have to do to have that happen as well. Um, it's going to also have an expiration date. And as I said, there's going to be some sort of measure of how you're proceeding and whether you're being successful. But IPEs can be continued. There can be a new IPE showing, well, now you've made it to this stage. You've now gone through your application process or you've finished your resume, and now you're going to practice interviewing. It can keep progressing through the application to be the hiring and then maintaining the employment. It is a signed agreement, so both the VR counselor and the individual will sign this after they have agreed, both parties have agreed that this would be the plan. So it's an important piece. It's almost like a contract that says what you're going to do, what they're going to do, and how you're going to proceed towards employment.
I think the really important thing that I just want to underscore what Jane said is that it should be something that you both agree to. So if people who are receiving VR services are thinking, oh, um, I agreed just because it's really seemed like that's what they wanted me to do. I would say take a pause. You can go back and try to fix that, right? If it's not actually the goal of the person receiving the services, because at the end of the day, it's not the VR counselor who's going to work. It's not anybody else involved in supporting who's going to work. It's the person receiving the services. And this should really be in service of that. So, these are just some tips when you've been told you have a draft of your IPE. You can prepare for the meeting, so you can go over and think about um, previous meetings you had or discussions with the VR counselor. If you want support for that meeting, you can invite a supporter. And sometimes it can be helpful to write down your requests beforehand. Definitely take your time to review the plan, make sure that it is actually including all the services that you need, and it is actually the goal that you want for employment. And if there's I think when we think about communication needs, obviously, if there's a need for an interpreter or a need for particular communication devices, those should absolutely be included. But you could also include preferences. So, I prefer to be texted at this phone number, not called, or I prefer to use email for my primary mode of communication. So all of that can be included in your plan, and that will help make sure that as your services go forward, you're getting the updates that you need in a way that you can understand and is most accessible to you. And definitely review your plan before you sign. If you are in the position of a supporter and you're helping somebody prepare for their IPE meeting with their counselor, you can advocate for opportunities for discussion and exploration before meeting with VR. So, make sure that the person has really had enough time to think about what it is that they want to do as their employment goal. And also go through the plan kind of step by step to ensure that the goal is accurate and the necessary services are indeed included. Because we are Disability Rights Maine, I think we think a lot about rights and how to make sure that your rights are respected in all different areas of life. So, in terms of protecting your rights or protecting the rights of people getting VR services in the VR process, the most crucial thing I can say is ask for any decision, anything that is a final decision, to be in writing. It can be an email, but it should be written down and not just a verbal conversation, because that makes it, if it's just a verbal conversation, it makes it really hard to do any of the other steps to protect rights. Um, if you're asking a question or you need a particular decision in writing, you can provide a deadline when you're contacting the counselor, or you're contacting anyone else at VR. So please, in 2 weeks, get back to me on this. You can keep your notes, take notes, and keep them in any manner that is written down. So it could be electronic, it could be in paper form. Keep your emails, and then as you're going through, especially if you have a particular employment goal and you're getting the sense that maybe there's some pushback or encouragement to go in a different direction, you can gather evidence that supports your strengths and why you want this particular goal. And always stay in regular contact with your counselor or with VR. So sometimes it seems like there's a disconnect between whose job it is to reach out next, who's making the next phone call, who's sending the next email. If you're leaving a meeting and you're not sure when the next communication or when the next meeting's going to be, definitely clarify who's calling who next. And I know from my experience at Disability Rights Maine working with people, sometimes people get frustrated with the VR process because it takes a long time, or you don't know, you haven't talked to your counselor in a while, you don't know what's going on. So definitely don't hesitate to be the squeaky wheel and reach out, communicate regularly, at least once a month, check in, what's going on. If you have concerns about something, or you're just really concerned because you haven't heard anything from the counselor, you can always ask for a meeting. You can always bring supporters to that meeting. And if they're saying, oh, well, it's our policy to do 3 phone calls and then it's your job to call us back, see if you can see those policies. They should be able to give you a copy.
So sorry about for my little computer mishap. It fell off its little perch, so I hope that didn't interrupt too much. So we're going to talk a little bit about if you disagree with VR decisions, but I want to say something. I realize we talked about this last week, and so maybe we neglected to bring it in, but we have Disability Rights Maine has the Client Assistance Program, and that is a program that is required for VR to a contract with an agency, like our agency, Disability Rights Maine, who we can help through this process. Our Client Assistance Program can help you at any stage, as our resources allow. And it would be great to, maybe at this stage, probably it's the most critical because you're now going to disagree with a decision and try to have them look at it again. Of course, you can do this on your own, but I think it's important to know that our client assistance program is there and we can talk things through. We can help you with your IEP if necessary. We can do a lot of things prior to actually this part where you're actually questioning the decision they made. According to Vocational Rehab, they really want to emphasize that the informal review is the best way to start. And understandably so, it's informal. You're going to talk to your counselor. You might talk to the individual who is the supervisor of your counselor. You're going to try to resolve this prior to going to the more formal way. But there are means to do it. You may not be able to resolve it that way. So there's also mediation, due process hearings, and civil action. So well, for one thing, number one, it has to be a decision. It can't just be, I don't like my counselor, so I'm going to ask for mediation or due process. It actually has to be a decision made by VR. And if you don't know if that's the case, you can certainly contact us or ask your counselor. Can I have this in writing? Is this a decision? VR says they'll put it in writing, but for some reason, if it isn't, I want to know what the decision is so I can then pursue other means. So go ahead and ask for that if they haven't already provided, or if it isn't clear to you whether that was a decision they made. And a decision I'm talking about is like, we're not going to provide you this service, or we're going to only provide this amount of money for that service. And so those are types of decisions that are kind of a final action. So what if you go through the informal review and hopefully that gets resolved and in your favor, great. But there's also the other processes, and you have to there's time frames to when you should pursue them, in which it gets a little complicated here. We're hoping to get some more clarification, but at the same time you're having your informal review, 30 days from that decision, you have to ask for mediation, or because mediation is voluntary, or you have to ask for the due process hearing. You can do both mediation and due process hearings, or you can go straight from the informal review to the due process hearing. Kind of crazy, but the one thing that doesn't really, we're good asking for clarification, is that as you're doing the informal review, does the clock keep ticking on the mediation and on the due process hearing? To protect for that, I think it's what I've advised some people is that you would like to pursue this informally, but if that is not successful, you want to maintain the right to do the mediation and the due process hearing. And just put that in writing. There are timeframes when they have to respond to the mediation and due process hearing, but that might get them to resolve the issue more quickly at the informal stage. I think that's what yeah. So, I'm next, yeah. So you start the informal process, and it's really, as it says, it's informal. So email your request or mail your request to the VR director and ask for an informal review. So we're saying to make it kind of formalized in the sense that you want to make sure it's on the record that you're pursuing this. In Maine, the VR directors are Alyssa Rowe and Samantha Fenderson, and we'll have email. We can send you those links to their emails when we mail out after our presentation. As I said earlier, you could add, if this informal review is unsuccessful, I'm requesting a mediation and or an impartial hearing after to resolve this disagreement. So that makes it it secures your right to pursue further if the informal process does not work for you. So the process, the informal review process, there's no really set requirements that they do, but typically they're probably going to review your records. I would hope they ask to meet with you to clarify why you think that's wrong. As I had already mentioned, with the client assistance program, or the CAP advocate is certainly available to be part of this process. And, you go through our intake, you call our office and ask, for assistance in that way. And, our process that Lucas described earlier would be reviewed, and then we would, we'd take an intake, and the attorney would look over, the managing attorney, and then decide how much we can get involved. But in the informal review process, we are supposed to do this in a timely fashion. What does timely mean? It's unclear. So that is why we keep stressing the 30 days for the due process hearing or the mediation. Hopefully, VR doesn't take a lengthy time to have this happen. I think they are motivated to resolve it at this level. But there's, again, back to the 30 days, which is kind of a bee in my bonnet kind of thing that I have a hard time understanding why they don't have more specifics on that. But anyway, that's kind of what the informal review process might look like, and it probably depends on each person.
So hopefully, like Jane said, hopefully the informal review process is successful and solves all of the concerns and resolves the issues. I have a feeling that that probably is the most used process, because we really don't have a clear answer from them about how all these timelines work. And as Jane and I both have some legal training and have worked as attorneys, so for us and for lawyer people, I think it's a very we're looking at those timelines very closely, because it really does determine people's ability to enforce their rights in these sort of more formal processes. But if you go through an informal review, what we've been given to believe by VR is they will issue a written response from that review, a written decision. And then that is a final decision for sure. and you have 30 days from that decision to request a more formal process. And this isn't an either or. You can request mediation and a hearing. You can just request mediation if you think that's the best way to solve the problem, or you can just request a hearing. And if you have questions about a particular situation where you're thinking about making that decision, you can definitely reach out to Disability Rights Maine CAP, the Client Assistance Program, to kind of figure out what's the best thing for this case. And even if we're not able to help you with that individual case, we will be able to provide information. The important thing to know, right, is while you are going through this sort of formal process, your services with vocational rehab should not stop. So, and they should be the same level of services you were getting right before this situation happened. So that's why it's called a stay put. So your services stay put. The mediation is a voluntary process. Both you and VR would have to agree to go through a mediation, and it could be ended by either side if it's not working. It's conducted by a impartial mediator, which means somebody that's not connected to VR or the individual themselves. It'd be a separate entity. And if you request mediation, it has to begin within 15 calendar days. So not 15 work days, but 15 actual days. Anything that you talk about in mediation would be confidential. So when you're going through it, that's whatever's happening there wouldn't then be able to be used in the due process hearing if you end up going to that step. Individuals who are requesting this formal review from VR have the right to be represented by the Client Assistance Program or by an attorney. And this mediation can't be used to slow things down, can't be used to delay your due process hearing. The due process hearing has to be made, the same thing, the request has to be made within 30 days of the decision. If you are in the position where you request both mediation and the due process hearing, the due process hearing might be delayed because of the mediation, and not forever, right? But you may say, I choose to try mediation and see if that can resolve the problem before I go to the due process hearing. And again, that would have to be something both sides would agree to. So the way to request a hearing for the due process would be in writing to the director of the Division of Vocational Rehab. And it must occur within 60 calendar days of the request for hearing, unless, of course, you agree to go through the mediation and bump that date out a bit. I'm not sure, how many folks here have been through this kind of hearing before. It's sort of similar to a fair hearing or an administrative hearing with DHHS. But the person who would be like the judge, the hearing officer, also doesn't work for Voc Rehab, right? So it's supposed to be an impartial person, not swayed by either side. And if you go through all of that and you get a decision from the due process hearing and you still don't like it, you have another option to appeal that decision to a civil court. So that would be, just like a certain kind of court that is not affiliated with the Division of Voc Rehab. So, assuming that everything goes really well with your VR services, and hopefully you never have to go through any of those formal processes, Or if you have had to go through them, you're successful and you get to the place you want to be with your vocational rehab services. Um, you are now in a place where you're starting to work. And I apologize, I'm getting a message from one of our colleagues. So don't forget to set up a direct deposit with your bank, and don't forget to report your wages to Social Security. And there are definitely resources for help to how to do that, and what exactly you need to report and all of that. So definitely reach out to your supporters, or you can reach out to us and we can see if we can send you in the right direction. If you have specific accommodation needs for work, definitely don't forget to ask for those and set those up with your employer. Um, if you are receiving Social Security income, which most likely you would be, or other benefits related to disability, reaching out to the local benefits counselors is really, really helpful because they can look at your particular situation, all the benefits you yourself are receiving, and figure out how exactly they would be impacted by work and how much income would impact those. So they're a great resource. Jane and I just got to meet with them yesterday. So definitely reach out. And if you're eligible, you can set up an ABLE account, which we'll talk a little more about. But essentially, it's a way for people receiving Social Security benefits and Medicaid benefits to be able to save money.
Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a minute, but first I want to emphasize two things on that last slide, although
Oh,
Lucas
yeah.
did great. But one of the major things that people who are receiving SSI or SSBI, one of the biggest barriers to going back to work is they're so afraid of losing their benefits. And that's why the local benefits counselor is important. Um, Most cases, you're going to be able to work and try out working at least um, while you have those benefits. And so it's really important that you talk to them. They unfortunately are also, have limited resources, but I think your VR counselor will help you get with it. Will also be able to refer you. But if you had some just basic questions, I think we can maybe respond to those. We would probably ultimately have to have you go to the benefits counselors themselves because they're well trained in that. The second thing I wanted to emphasize is reporting your wages to Social Security, a very important factor. You can do it online. Um, and it's really so important because you don't want to get stuck with an overpayment. And that's the sure way to do it if you haven't reported your wages to Social Security. They will probably ask you near the end of the year to report your wages again. That's been an experience that's happened, but it's really important to keep up with that and let them know how much you're earning because that changes your Social Security. And if they don't know that, or if you wait till 6 months after you started working, you may then have an overpayment because say your benefits continued, even though there might have had to be some kind of reduction. So that is something the benefits counselor would definitely be able to help you with, but I can't emphasize that enough. So we're going to go into other work resources, but I do want to take a pause because these are not VR related, and I know we have about 9 minutes left, and we have the information. You're going to be sent the PowerPoint, but I wanted to see if there's any questions right now having to do with VR and what we went over. I think there's one right now I see in the chat. Um, someone asked, as long as we're talking about opening bank accounts and reporting wages to Social Security, what about selective service? If we have someone who we feel should not be on the list, I'm a 23-year retired veteran, how could we advise the family? Can DRM help with that? Um, so I don't think we have an active draft right now. Is that correct? I'm not aware, but you don't want to be on the at all. So I understand that. Um, we could possibly help. I think the thing is to let us know about it and we could look into it a little bit more. Um, this individual may have already gone through our intake process. I'm not sure, but if not, feel free to give us a call and we will look into that if we can and see if we can help in any way. But thank you for your question. Um, are there any other questions? Give it a couple seconds here. Again, we are going to go into some of these other resources, but this was focusing on VR today, so I don't want to move ahead too quickly. Looks like there's another question. Is
Yep,
an
I
able
see.
count only for a working disabled person? That's a good question. Well, why don't we'll go back to that slide, okay? Just so we can talk about it. And I think Lucas will have that answer.
Yes. So, in answer to the question, you do not have to be working to be eligible for an ABLE account. There are specific eligibility criteria, and I think you can go down to Bangor Savings Bank and they will be happy to help you with that information. There is also additional information about ABLE accounts on the uh, maine.gov/treasurer website, and we will have that in the slides that we send out to you all. Um, Essentially, for anybody who isn't already aware, an ABLE account is a type of bank account that allows for people with disabilities to save money. Um, and it's special really because it is not it allows for those savings to sort of be held aside and not affect other benefits, and you don't have to spend it all by the end of the year. There are caps to how much money people can save per year, and those caps do depend on whether the person is working or not. So if you are working and you want to open an ABLE account, I would say definitely go and make sure that you understand the specific rules as they apply. Um, Essentially, there's questions about if you're saving money in other ways or if you have some sort of workplace savings account that's provided by your employer, things like that. So the cool thing about this is it's pretty new and it seems to be working pretty well. And then recently we've had some changes in the rules, the federal rules, um, where they have increased the threshold from 26 to 46. So essentially the disability has to have occurred before you were 46 years old instead of before you were 26 years old. Any
As of
other? Oh,
January 1st. As of January 1st, that's when the law comes in.
yes. Yeah. It is not in effect yet. It will be starting January. Um, any other questions on ABLE accounts? And I think Harper might be able to help us if people want to come off mute. If you just ask to be unmuted, we can do that.
And there's another Q&A too. So is there anybody that has their hand up, or should we go to the question that's in the Q&A? Okay, the question in the QA is please make sure when an Social Security review and Maine Care review happens that the person doing the review understands it is not considered an asset. Some reviews for people I support, the person was denied Maine Care because they labeled ABLE accounts as an asset. It is not. Thank you for that. That's a really important factor. Appreciate you bringing that up.
Mhm.
Um, and thank you for doing that for your individuals that you work with.
Yes,
Uh,
and hopefully, as the reviewers become more familiar with ABLE accounts, they will be able to recognize that that's doesn't count as an asset. But I think these are still relatively new, and how they work exactly is still getting the word out to everybody.
I mean, using it as an asset is, I mean, it's the exact reason why these were created, so you can save money to use on other things. So yeah, counting it as an asset doesn't fit with the whole reason for this. Maybe we could go back if there's not another question there. Harper, is there anybody else with their hands up? Oh, there's another question in the Q&A. Oh, great info on able accounts. Thank you. Yeah, good. Um, let's go back to the general about other resources. Yeah, so we've mentioned benefits counseling. These are other resources, and this doesn't mean whether you're working with VR or not, these apply. So benefit counseling, I think we've emphasized how important that is. Social Security has embedded work incentives into the program, realizing that individuals trying to return to work, they may have to have some assistance and not lose their benefits immediately, or especially not lose their Medicaid or Maine Care. That says Medicaid or Medicaid, but it's Maine Care. Able accounts, as Lucas has mentioned, is one way. There's a Cash Maine, which has courses to budgeting such, and there's an apprenticeship program. But I'm going to have us move right quickly because we're almost out of time into the work incentives because I think they're really important. These are rules that Social Security has that allows you to keep your benefits while exploring work. And they're different whether you receive SSI or SSDI. Can you move to the next slide real quickly? Some of the examples of these, and there's quite a few, is that extending your Medicare and Medicaid coverage. You can take out of your total, there's something called substantial gainful activity, which is a cap for people on SSDI. You can take out impairment related work expenses to make it so it does your income is minus that. So that's how it impacts your benefits. There's past plans, which we're probably not going to get to today, and there are work attempts. You can make a work attempt. You have a what's called a trial work period where you can actually try to work. That's with SSDI. So that was really quick. We have 1 minute left. We are going to send out these slides, and the survey will be coming as well. But most importantly here is DRM is available to help. We're going to also, we have a lot of programs working for employment. We can help with other things not related to VR, but and I know the minutes here. I'm talking too quickly and I apologize to the interpreters. But there's a lot of things we can do. So give us a call. The last slide will show you how to access us. And I'm sorry that we kind of ran out of time here.
So I think I still have 12:59. So if anyone has a burning question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A.
We can stay on a
We
minute
will,
more
if
if
we're
you
not
want.
able to answer live, we will definitely answer in our next communication to you all.
This
Uh,
is Harper. There's one question about looking for budgeting courses. So we will make sure to get some links for that
Yes,
sent
that's it.
out.
Yeah, through Cash Main, we'll definitely get that to you. Thank you
Yep.
for asking. And thank you all.
and please do come back next Wednesday for our final webinar installment.
You'll have to see me again, but Lucas will take the day, not the day off. He'll do other work. But it is about transition youth and moving into employment and getting accommodations.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, everybody.
everyone.
Yeah,
We will send out all the follow-up info shortly.
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Yep. Bye-bye.